Good afternoon. I'm Parveen Yaqoob, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Pro-Vice Chancellor Research and Innovation. Welcome to the second of 4 sessions aligned with COP26. Last week we kicked off the series with Nigel Arnell and Andrew Charlton Perez. Nigel explained the basis of COP and how COP21 had resulted in the Paris Agreement in 2015, which was a commitment to limit the increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels and to aim for net zero emissions by 2050. Now, COP26, of course, is underway now, and while we're hearing that the G20 leaders have reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement, we've also heard that Russia, India and China have rejected the call for net zero by 2050, India saying that they're going to do that 20 years later. And environmental campaigners already criticising G20 leaders for lack of ambition. So Nigel made it clear last week that the current pledges will only get us to 3 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, which will still have dramatic consequences. So they're not enough, and he said that we do need bigger commitments. He also highlighted how the University of Reading has been key to winning the science argument for climate change, with 6 members on the IPCC, but that it can actually be quite challenging to get the science across in the right way to affect the decision making. And then we heard from Andrew, who followed up with a summary of what had happened at the recent Climate Education Summit. And he highlighted really well how education and engagement and research and influence must operate side by side to make a difference. So for the next generation of students, the impact of climate change will be their lived reality. So we need to equip them with the skills and the knowledge they'll need. So today we have 2 speakers, Amanda Callaghan and Deepa Senapathi, each giving a 10 to 12 minute talk on the themes of greening the curriculum and balancing biodiversity with food security. Deepa's actually at COP26 this week, and Amanda has unfortunately been a bit unwell. So we're going to play recordings of both of their talks, but they will both be joining us live for the Q&A afterwards. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Amanda Callaghan. She's Professor of Invertebrate Zoology and Curator of the Cole Museum of Zoology. She's also the University Lead for the Education Strand of the Environmental Sustainability Strategy, and she's been consulting widely across the university to understand how we embed sustainability right across our teaching activity. So over to Amanda's talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this very short talk on greening the curriculum. My name is Amanda Callaghan and I am the Sustainability Education Lead within the university's Environmental Sustainability Committee. And just to warn you that I do have some difficulty saying the word sustainability, which is a bit unfortunate, really. Now, there can be no doubt that climate change is the defining crisis of our generation. And the United Nations has drawn up 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which no doubt you have seen in various forms. And one of these, number 4, is quality education. And this is something that I want to address today. Now, the university is fairly active in research in climate change and also in education. And in fact, this September, held a virtual conference, Climate in the Classroom, and this is basically aimed at teachers and children, because for the children of today it's going to be their reality that they're living with the consequences of climate change. And a bit of debates about what we can do, and we're all hoping that COP26 conference this week is going to be successful. But the question is, what are we doing about this within the University of Reading? Well, I mentioned already education for sustainable development, and the question is, well, what is it? This is a definition from the United Nations World Summit, process of equipping students with the knowledge and understanding skills and attributes needed to work and live in a way that safeguards environmental, social and economic well-being, both in the present and for the future generations. And you can see below, we already have some information on this on the website. This is via Essential. Now, we need to be able to embed ESD into everything that we do. The greening of the curriculum is not limited to environmental issues alone. It's the business of everybody, and all subjects really need to see how they can embed it within their programmes. And in fact, the university strategy from 2020 is to embed environmental sustainability across our curriculum and also our staff training programmes. And it's also mentioned in the curriculum framework, section 4.1, again, sort of echoing what was said by the United Nations for our students. Now, part of the university strategy is to address a league which is called People and Planet, which basically ranks universities based on how sustainable they are. And the university wants to be in the top 5 most sustainable universities. And in fact, it has ambitions to be at the very top. And I'm sure you'll get this information through all of the talks that are going ahead over the next few weeks related to COP26. Now, what they've done is the different colours here you can see on the slides are different categories. The paler green one is education, and universities are classified like degrees as first class, 2-1, 2-2, etc. And this is the list of first class universities. And in fact, Reading in 2019 was on this list, but you can't see it there because it was 28th, so it just fell off the bottom. And we got a score of 21.5% for education. And we know for a fact, based on the activities that we've been undertaking in the past year or so, that that has improved and it will improve. But the scores will not be released until November. But we're hoping that all things being equal, we will go up in this league table. We've already this year launched or relaunched an OOC, which was produced by the Walker Institute on tackling climate crisis, and this has been made available to all new students coming into the university. It's actually available for everyone, so if you want to have a look at it, please do go and see if you can find it. I think you can start the course from November. Now, within the university, we've got a lot of expertise. A lot of people have been thinking about this for quite some time. It's not new to them, although I think it probably is new to some other subjects. Here's an example of some subjects, mostly in the sciences, where already they are giving modules on the environmental and social issues which are linked to climate change. And these are undergraduate modules, and in many instances, these modules are actually available to students outside of those schools, and particularly the science of climate change, which is produced by meteorology. And this is something that all our students can take, and it's also going to be offered as a non-credit bearing option for students to learn about climate change, even though their programme might not let them, because perhaps they're accredited, it might not let them take it as part of their actual degree. We want to do more of this, so one of the things I would say is that if you do have, just go back to the previous slide, if you do have courses that you think are available for students outside of your school, please do let us know, and we'll add it to a list, because we want to make a list available for students. Now, it's not just within the curriculum. We're hoping to develop a new award. We have a red award. We're thinking of something along the lines of a green award. Now there is no such thing as a green award at present, and it may not be called that. It may be called something else. But I think there is an appetite to allow students to give evidence to demonstrate that they are working towards environmental sustainability skills and that they have awareness in this area. And the idea is that it might be a badge that they get as part of their degree. But we've not sorted out the details yet, but hopefully you'll be hearing about this in the future. Now, I mentioned staff training courses previously, and the Walker Institute is currently producing a climate science online course for all staff. And the idea is that, you know, we can't ask all of our students to be completely up on climate change if we are not ourselves knowledgeable in this area. And certainly whenever I've been at meetings and they've talked about providing these courses for students, the staff around the table have said, oh, I'd like to do this. So this is your opportunity to learn about climate science from the best. It's not compulsory. It shouldn't take that much of your time, but we're hoping it will be part of the training for new staff members. Now, we're also hoping to hold workshops for academic staff to help you embed ESD into your curriculum and also to try and mainstream sustainability. So one of these is a workshop that's going to be held in January. We haven't got the actual date yet, but as soon as we do, we'll let you know. We hope you'll come along. And the idea is that this will be an interactive workshop that will look at various things such as learning outcomes, topics, case studies, projects, strategy, assessments, etc., that allow you to take some aspects of environmental sustainability and put them into your modules and into your programs. And the idea is that this is a workshop to help you understand what you can do. You might think, oh, it's not possible, but in fact it is. This has been done elsewhere in other universities, and certainly there's an awful lot of literature available to help you. And if you've already done this, then please do contact me and we'll invite you to come along and help in the workshop. Another workshop that we're hoping to hold is from Professor Tom Oliver. He's in my school, Biological Sciences, and he's published this book called The Self-Delusion. And he is offering an interdisciplinary academic workshop to look at the key constraints and opportunities for mainstreaming a sustainability mindset in students across the university. So the idea is that it will be helping you to think in this way to then help your students think in this way. And again, we hope that we know that a lot of you already are aware of this, but we're hoping that we're going to get mixes of disciplines to come along and have the discussions together. Teaching and learning funding already mentions sustainability, but it's going to be a lot more explicit going forward. And so, for example, the Teaching and Learning Development Fund and the partnerships in learning and teaching, the plant, are going to have both sustainability and environmental aspects recognised and embedded as a criterion for getting funding. So it's something that we really want you to come along and work with us on. And we're also intending to run workshops with a community of practice for student engagement to try and help schools promote and deliver sustainability education in programs and modules by having student partners who are also trained in this, who can be within schools and help move this forward. So we're really hoping that you'll engage in some element of this. We know that there's an awful lot going on, but the idea is that it's all about trying to produce tools and having workshops to help you move forward with this.
Thanks, Amanda, and apologies to the audience for the technical hitches. The video files tend to be very big, and so working from home often means that the broadband can't really cope. I'm going to go straight on to the second talk in the interest of time. So I'm pleased to introduce Deepa Senapathi, a Senior Research Fellow in the School of Agriculture Policy and Development. Her research focuses on the impacts of environmental change on biodiversity and ecosystem services. She's currently a NERC Knowledge Exchange Fellow and is also a COP26 Universities Network Ambassador. So hopefully this video will work a little bit better.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deepa Senapathi and I work as a Senior Research Fellow in the School of Agriculture, Policy and Development. I'm an ecologist and conservation biologist, and sometimes working in the field of biodiversity conservation feels quite difficult. There isn't a single ecosystem on this planet that hasn't been affected by extinctions or damage. Whether you're talking about coral reefs or tropical forests, polar regions or temperate regions like what we find ourselves in, there are 1 million animal and plant species currently at risk of extinction, more so than any other time in human history. And the single most biggest reason for this decline in biodiversity is us as human beings and our actions. It's the way we've managed our land, destroyed and fragmented our habitats. It's the way we've changed climate, It's the way we've polluted our terrestrial and aquatic habitats. And also we've facilitated the movements of invasive species that outcompete native species for resources. At the moment, there's about 3/4 of terrestrial habitats and 2/3 of oceans that have been altered or damaged by human actions. If we focus on terrestrial habitats, much of the blame for this sort of land management has been laid at the door of agricultural land management. The intensive agriculture that sort of characterizes the post-war era and our need to feed 7 billion plus people on the planet has meant that there is a lot of difficulty in how we manage our land and balance biodiversity conservation. And while this debate rages on about what we should eat and how it should be produced, there's also a bigger aspect of what the carbon footprint of our food systems are. Now, I don't know about you, but I do love my chocolate and I eat very little red meat. But I was surprised to find out that depending on where and how my chocolate was produced, it could have a bigger carbon footprint than some red meat production. Now, this gives a whole lot of queries on what we should eat. But sustainable production of food is just one side of the coin. Accessibility and affordability of healthy diets is the other side of the coin that also needs to be considered. Now, when we talk about healthy diets, or on the opposite side, malnutrition or undernourishment, we always think of the global south and the developing countries. But it might surprise you to know that within the UK, 1.96 million people are malnourished, 3 million are undernourished, and 14% of UK families with children have experienced food insecurity in the last 6 months. And also, the other aspect of sustainable food production and making this accessible, if you look at the food pyramid of what constitutes a healthy diet versus the pyramid of environmental impacts of producing this food, you can see that they're almost directly inversely proportional to each other. So we are left with these questions of how do we sustainably produce food? How do we feed 7 billion plus people on the planet, but at the same time do it in a way that's not detrimental to biodiversity? So how do we tackle these issues? For a very long time, biodiversity conservation stood separate from food security issues. But the more I'm invested in this research, the more I realize that these issues are irrevocably interlinked, and finding context-specific solutions is really important. For example, diversifying crop rotations, minimizing the cutting of hedgerows, mowing our lawns less, putting in wildflower strips and other wildflower margins in our fields, all of these could help boost biodiversity and also improve ecosystem services like pollination and natural pest regulation on our land. But taking land out of production comes at a cost. There is a study by Blau and Isaacs from the US that show that for every wildflower margin put in or any ecological intervention put in, the farmer loses his profit margins for the first couple of years. It takes 3 to 4 years to break even, and then you see the returns on your profit. Now that is possible in the developed world, in countries where there are agri-environmental incentives and subsidies for farmers to take land out of production or manage land in a sustainable manner. But in countries where those incentives do not exist, we have to find other solutions that might work. So one of the projects I'm involved in is a GCRF funded project in South India. We are working with farmers in mango and moringa fields, and we are trying interventions to boost the number of insect pollinators, which can then have a positive impact on the yield and quality of their produce. So when we initially broached the farmers with these ideas of wildflower strips, they were not very happy with it. This area is a water-stressed, drought-prone area, and putting wildflower strips is a lot of effort for very little gain. But having discussions helped because the farmers came up with a solution themselves. They were happy to come up with secondary crops that could be intercropped with their main crop or put in as border crops. Their criteria was that either these crops should be sold as a secondary source of income in the market or should be a source of nutrition for their own homes. So in the case of moringa fields, we put in marigold as intercrops, which has a high economic value in the market. And we also put in border crops with red lentils, which the farmers are using for their own nutritional needs at home. And this is actually, our preliminary results are showing that our pollinator numbers are higher in fields with these interventions than the fields without these interventions. Whether this actually translates to economic benefits for the farmers remains to be seen, as that data is yet to be analysed. So watch this space. A similar example is also from South India, where we had rice paddy fields and we put black gram, or cowpeas as we know it, on the edges of these paddy fields. Now this wasn't a pollination experiment, but we wanted to see if having these interventions meant there were fewer pests in the rice paddy fields and whether it boosted the number of natural beneficial insects that would eat or attack these pests. And again, preliminary results are showing that this is the case, that these sort of interventions that are of benefit to the farmers can boost beneficial biodiversity and the ecosystem services they provide. One additional quick anecdote, which made me very happy, was that some farmers on the paddy fields who were initially opposed to this idea have seen the benefits that their peers have gained from this experiment, and of their own volition have gone on to put these in their fields. So from these examples that I previously mentioned, you can see that there's definitely a way forward for nature-based solutions that can balance biodiversity conservation and food security needs. But there are still some outstanding questions that remain in conservation as to where we focus our efforts. Do we focus them just on the species that provide these benefits? For example, a study that came out a few years ago indicated that 80% of crop pollination needs are fulfilled by just 2% of the species. So then, where's the argument for trying to save the other 98%, you might ask? But saving diversity is really, really key, and protecting diversity. Our research in Reading has actually shown that the more diverse a system is, the more stability it has across years. So there are fewer or lesser fluctuations in a system that is more diverse than a system that has few species in it. This then adds to stable ecosystem functioning. So we can think about it in terms of an insurance policy for the future, but if you wanted to use a sporting analogy, some of you might be football fans, I'm a cricket fan myself, but if you're thinking of a team sport, the manager or the coach always puts his best team on the field. But that's not where the decisions stop. The bench strength or the reserves list matters, because if one of the key players can't perform their function, for whatever reason, they might get injured or might not be able to play on the day, someone else needs to be available to take on that role and perform that function. And biodiversity is no different. If you only focus on the suite of species that are performing a function or service currently, then future environmental conditions might mean that these species cannot deliver the functions and services they currently provide. And if we haven't invested in wider biodiversity, we might find ourselves at risk of losing ecosystem services and function. So I think it sort of circles back to our motivations for why we need to do conservation. For some people, the motivations might be iconic and charismatic species, the big five, or the beautiful species that they want their children and their grandchildren to see. For others, it might be those species that are key for ecosystem functioning and service. For some of us, it just might come down to food security. Are we protecting the species we need to deliver on food security? But I suspect that for all of us, it's probably a combination of all of these things. And I'd leave you with this, to have a think about what might motivate you to get into biodiversity conservation. What might motivate you to look at the balance between biodiversity conservation and food security? What are those choices that you can make in the context you find yourself in that means we can find solutions and find a balance between these two big problems? Thank you.